case numbers there?
Well, they're coming down well. The key here is just making sure that people are still getting tested to be sure that those numbers are real. I mean, they're obviously real, but is it 5 or is it 20 or is it 30? Just got to be absolutely sure they're not missing cases. And as you've seen, the people are getting tired of the restrictions and those parties that you heard about. One way around this is mass testing, and the Doherty Institute on Friday announced a mass testing a way of doing mass testing the methodology using a saliva test, checking different ways of doing a saliva test which they've developed to see whether or not that's feasible to do on a large scale. There are lots of rapid tests coming on the market, and it may well be that a way to actually check this in the future is to have mass testing, supermarkets, malls, pharmacies and what have you, of relatively cheap tests which do have an error rate, but if you come up positive, you could go and have the real test. You don't have to, you get the test in a few minutes, and therefore you don't have to isolate yourself till you get the result. Just to check that you're not missing something. New South Wales, they're testing sewage to see whether or not they're missing virus. You're going to have to do some kind of monitoring so that you're ahead of the game in case you're missing cases. But it is fantastic news in Victoria.
Sure is, and restrictions are starting to ease. Primary schools are going to be among the first things to open up the start of next term, I believe. Why are they going first and not high schools, or why aren't high schools going with them?
Well, it comes from data from overseas looking at the contagiousness, if you like, at different age groups. And it looks as though that 10 or 11 years old is the cutoff. So if you're under 10, you don't seem to be as infectious as kids over 10 and young adults. Kids over 10 look as if they've got kind of the same infectivity as adults, although it does grow through adolescence. So you can't cut off primary school at 10. You take a little bit of a risk with the 10 years to 12, 11 or 12, but that's a fairly safe thing to do. The main risk with kids going back to school is the increased circulation of parents and traffic. You have more people out and about mixing. That's the risk more than the kids at school.
Just away from coronavirus now, we've been talking about over the weekend the sad death of Susan Ryan, trailblazer figure for women in politics, of course, but she fell ill after a swim on Friday. Do we know what happened? We
don't know what happened, but it was obviously some sort of catastrophic event following a swim. I think she was a regular swimmer. And what's worth saying here is that swimming is disproportionately represented as an exercise which seems to be associated with sudden death and sudden cardiac arrest. I'm not saying that's what Susan Ryan had, but for some reason swimming is, so essentially exercise is safe, sudden cardiac arrest is rare. You can prevent sudden cardiac arrest by having exercise, including swimming. But if you look at the world of sudden death, swimming is overly represented, particularly open water swimming, and it's thought, and cold water immersion. And it's thought there are two things going on here. One is sudden cold water immersion can just change the way your heart works, and your heart works against your lungs, and the result can be poor, particularly if you're vulnerable, and that could be young people as well. And then when you immerse yourself, there's a redistribution of your blood from your abdomen into your chest, and therefore your chest is having to deal with a greater internal pressure, and that could affect it as well. So again, emphasising swimming is good exercise, but if you're at risk, probably it's one to talk to your doctor about.
More on the Health Report on RN at 5:30 tonight, and of course more on the Coronacast podcast. Norman, thanks.
You're welcome.
More than 300 community groups, including charities, housing advocates, local councils and unions, are calling on the Prime Minister to do more to support the construction industry, and they're suggesting the Commonwealth pay for at least 30,000 social housing properties to be built over the next 4 years. Kate Colvin is leading the Everybody's Home campaign, and she joins us now. Hi, Kate. Tell us more about what you've got planned then.
So look, we're asking for the government to get building social housing so they can kill two birds with one stone. Firstly, get construction workers working, because there's been a big fall off in residential construction. And secondly, fix homelessness by getting people into housing.
How much social housing is needed to make a real difference?
Look, there's actually a shortfall of social housing across Australia of 433,000 properties. So the 30,000 is just a step down that path. But it's an important step, because that's the amount of social housing that could get built really fast. So over the next 4 years, you could start delivering that social housing, which would make an enormous difference.
And where should this housing be built, and what sort of properties should they be?
Look, a mix of properties. We're talking about, when we talk about social housing, we're talking about rental properties that really low-income households can afford to rent. So they're rented at 25–30% of people's incomes. And we're talking about one-bedroom properties, two-bedroom properties. In every suburb and town across Australia, there's a shortfall of social housing. So this is about local jobs, and it's also about delivering housing where people need it.
And what sort of boost to the construction industry do you estimate that this would provide, Kate?
So economists have done the research and calculated that the 30,000 properties over 4 years would generate 18,000 jobs per year. And that's because building houses takes a lot of workers. It's not just the tradies who are building the house, it's the architects, it's the lawyers, it's the finance people. There's a lot of different industries involved in house building. And that's why, the last stimulus that government invested in social housing, every dollar that was spent delivered $1.30 back to the economy.
What sort of approach have you made then to the federal government on this? You have 300 community groups signed up to it.
Yes, look, there's been a number of conversations with the federal government, and I hope that they're hearing. I mean, it's not just community groups that are calling for this. The property industry have also been out saying, look, social housing would make a big difference. Economists are out saying the best form of stimulus is residential housing construction, social housing that wouldn't be built unless government invested. And now we're saying get behind social housing construction. So I think we're hoping the federal government hear that call and make the investment that's needed so that every Australian can have a home.
Just on another angle, Kate, at the height of the pandemic, accommodation was found for homeless people to get them off the streets and in a position to isolate. Have those people been able to find alternative places to stay, or are they back without a roof over their heads?
Look, many people very sadly are back without a roof over their heads because because of this massive shortfall of social housing. So in some states, there's still a hotel program continuing. Certainly in Victoria, the state government has continued to make that investment. In other states, sometimes the state government has been able to find housing for a few of the people in hotels, but unfortunately, many people without that housing option have returned to homelessness. And the thing is we've got a whole extra set of people becoming homeless because of continued job losses, because of cuts last Friday to JobSeeker, cuts today to JobKeeper. The situation is very serious. Lots of additional people losing their jobs and unable to pay rent for the first time.
Kate Colvin, thank you.
Thank you.
A new survey has found that an increasing number of people want to work from home once the COVID-19 crisis is under control. Pre-pandemic, about 1 in 5 employees worked from home on a regular basis. The research was conducted by the University of Sydney's Institute of Transport and Logistics Studies. Its founding director, Professor David Hensher, joins us now. Hi, David. So what proportion of people now want to work more from home than previously?
It varies from state to state, but a good number is about 20% to 30%, which is up quite a bit from pre-COVID. But most importantly, we're talking about 1 to 2 days a week with the support of employers. I think that's the magical number, because an interest in working from home isn't going to work if the employers are not going to support it. And I often call this the unintended positive consequences of COVID-19. People being forced to experiment with something that's turned out to be a lot better than many people thought, especially white-collar workers, office workers, professionals, and so on.
And is there an appetite among bosses to allow their staff to stay working from home?
There definitely is. Almost 1 in 4 people surveyed said that their employer supported some amount of working from home, which we have calculated to be 1 to 2 days per week, and especially in urban areas, lesser in regional areas.
So you said that you found there was a difference in the working from home numbers between the states and territories. What were those variations?
Yeah, well, the survey was done in September, so we're suffering from the situation in Victoria. So we have to be a little bit careful in comparing the numbers because different states are in different timings of restrictions. But typically, pre-COVID, about 20% of people would work at home maybe a day a week or something like that. And during the COVID period that we're in now, we're seeing numbers varying from 55% in Queensland down to about 27% in Queensland. Queensland's a very interesting example because we also know that the public sector is actively considering allowing 1 in 4 employees to work from home on any one day. That's a huge drop. And what I'd like to add, if I may, is that given our interest in the transportation system, if we achieve the 1 or 2 days per week effect spread through the week, and evidence suggests it's not going to be a Friday or a Monday alone to get those extra long weekends, then we're going to see a 10 to 20% drop in traffic on the roads, which in the worst case is even better than what we see in school holidays.
So it'll make it easier for those of us who still have to go into the office in the week.
Absolutely. In fact, the commuting trip is the major reason that people want to work from home to avoid it. And so those people who do drive their cars into the city and other areas should end up finding that the traffic will continue to flow much better, even when we're over the worst of COVID.
Professor David Hensher, good to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ros.
Now, for sports news, Tony Armstrong joins us. Hey, Tony. So the AFL launched their 2020 final.